Oseo.
Oseo.
Okay, I have some news from Indian country today, and that's what I'm going to present. The first one here is this photograph. It's very interesting, because last week, if you were listening to me, I was talking about wolf, and here is a statue of wolf. And very interestingly here, this is a yurt. And Vivian Olds up there in Nevada, she has a yurt that looks like this. That is her gallery. And her yurt looks better because it has a porch on it. But otherwise, it's this kind of yurt. And I'm going to tell you what this is about. A photo of a wolf statue outside the spiritual lodge taken by Canadian Lieutenant General Jean-Marc Lantier, who said, "This is the first permanent indigenous spiritual lodge in the history of the Canadian Forces. Was inaugurated at the St. Jean Garrison. This marks an important milestone for all members of the Canadian Army." And I surmise that there are stepping stones to this. The first, a few months back, we had a couple here from British Columbia who definitely told me that all of Canada now recognizes Indigenous people in the term of First Nations, so not tribes and that kind of thing. So the next thing that has occurred there in Canada is the recognition of Métis. Métis are people, it's a French word, generally like mestizo, but it's people who are French Native American, basically. And the United States government refuses that kind of recognition for Métis because it's a racist government. And so those two things are prior to this for the military or army to give this recognition to a spiritual lodge, actually, there in Canada in this way. So very, very noteworthy, as well as this photograph with the wolf and the yurt. Okay, that's one. Thank you. Now this one is going to be about buffalo. And this picture here is of a buffalo calf. And also with the buffalo calf, you see this plant here. This is a thistle plant. And thistle means here in Turtle Island, it's very ancient, means it goes way back. It's very old, very ancient, going way back. And so here we have the buffalo calf being featured here. And this article is from Indian Country Today, which I'm going to read it. The birth of every buffalo calf on First Nations lands marks a cultural and spiritual victory that gives all our members hope. As each calf struggles to stand and walk, the hearts of Native Americans celebrate their own survival, their strength in community, and their dreams of opportunity for future generations. At the first Tribal Buffalo Conservation Summit in Denver on November 1st, representatives from dozens of Native American nations from 11 states gathered to share their experiences in bringing buffalo back to our indigenous lands and to help other nations start buffalo herds. The gathering demonstrated the strong unity and commitment that is building around buffalo conservation and the partnerships that are necessary to achieve a shared First Nations vision. Speakers at the summit recalled the tens of millions of buffalo that dominated the West for thousands of years, tilling the ground with their hooves to cultivate the rich and diverse grasslands that nourish hundreds of wildlife species. Buffalo also embody the power of community. In winter, buffalo gather together and stand shoulder to shoulder, facing winter storms to shield the herd from brutal blizzards. At the summit, the panels of tribal conservation and wildlife experts faced into the challenge of buffalo conservation, sharing their hard-learned lessons in moving herds, grazing requirements, water supplies, genetics, and a wealth of other information that will foster more successes. First Nations representatives also talked about how the return of the buffalo is reviving the ecosystems, fostering the growth and return of native plants, birds, and other wildlife of the prairie. Cultural leaders explained how restoring buffalo to First Nations lands revives the traditions that were inspired by the buffalo hunts and ceremonial practices where everyone in the group, from the very young to the elderly, had a role. All shared in the buffalo bounty that provided food, clothing, shelter, medicine, ceremonial items, tools, and other necessities of life. The summit, hosted by the Fort Peck and the Fort Belknap Tribes, Intertribal Buffalo Council, National Wildlife Federation, Defenders of Wildlife, and World Wildlife Fund, brought together First Nations that have led the way in buffalo conservation. In the past 6 years, many First Nations have worked to restore hundreds of buffalo to First Nations lands in Montana, Wyoming, and other parts of the West. At the summit, a collaborative vision emerged of restoring tens of thousands of buffalo on hundreds of thousands of acres of First Nations lands across the West in the decades ahead. For First Nations, the buffalo are far more than a Western wildlife icon. The restoration of bison herds represents the rebirth of century-old tribal traditions that ensured survival and new opportunities to engage youth in raising buffalo, to learn about our own culture. Bringing buffalo back also provides opportunities for creating jobs in rural areas, working with the surrounding communities, and producing a healthy, organic food source. Dozens of buffalo calves were born on First Nations lands in 2018, a tribute to the years of work and partnership that made buffalo restoration possible. As the speaker said at the end of the summit, bringing back herds of buffalo to First Nations lands is a concrete example of healing the past and creating a better future. Well,